If I've not had the privilege of meeting you yet, my name's John Jennings, and I am the director of church coaching for the Pentecostal Church of God, have been for the past 4 years. And I'm also one of the lead pastors at Pure Heart Church in Glendale, Arizona, where my home is. And I am celebrating this year 32 years of full-time pastoral ministry. It seems like a lifetime, but it's been just an incredible journey along the way. So without any further ado, I want to introduce to you an individual, a lady that I have the privilege of working with every day here at our church in Glendale. And her name is Erin Rathier. And Erin is our small groups director here at the church. She works on the team, the immediate team that I oversee relating to discipleship and spiritual formation. And for the last, about 2 years, I think now, Erin, you and I have had the privilege of working together. So, Erin, just tell our guests a little bit about yourself, how you got started in ministry, and how you really became passionate about small groups.
Well, it's so nice to be here. Thank you, John, for having me, and hello, everyone. So I got started in ministry when I was 22 years old. God called me into youth ministry, and that's where I spent most of my time. Um, I actually, for 22 years, was in that realm, and crazily enough, I was the staff person, always in trouble for not being in a small group. When the pastor would say everyone needs to get in a small group, I was like, I'm so busy. I have all these teenagers, but really the problem was I really just didn't enjoy them. I would get in groups and we would start books, and very quickly people would stop doing the book study, and then they just wanted to talk about all the terrible things in their lives. And as much as I was compassionate, I didn't want to sit for hours every week talking about all that stuff. I wanted to do more productive things, maybe. So for the last 7 years, about 7 years, I saw groups done a different way. I had taken some youth leaders to a training at North Coast Church in California, and I just noticed something about their church. They're a big, big, big church. And it turned out the small groups were what are different. And God said, hey, why don't you do this at your church? And so that's what happened. And I quickly became the number one fan of small groups. Love them, think they're great, think they're wonderful. I just saw a different way.
Awesome. So, why do you think? I mean, just what do you see as the biblical foundation for small groups? I mean, why would churches of any size want to go in this direction? Why is it important?
Yeah, well, I mean, I really just, it's so basic. Sounds like the Sunday school answer, but this is literally what Jesus did. When he started his earthly ministry, he gathered 12 guys and said, let's go. And so their spiritual growth happened around God's word, because he was the word, right? And
Yes.
in community with each other. And so I just kind of feel like if that's what Jesus did, why do we try to do something different? If that's what he thought was effective discipleship for the 12 that would literally change the world, um, why isn't that what we do?
Right. And it's really I think we relationally tap out at about 50 people. And I find it interesting that most churches in our country average about 50 people. I mean, that's
Mhm.
the average. And so I would contend that if churches want to go to the next level, that they're going to have to think in terms of growing larger and smaller at the same time because of the relational stretch that people feel. And I mean, even if we think about the relationships in our own life and the people that we're actually close to,
Mhm.
I think we would probably cap that number out right around that 50 number. Now, obviously, we don't, and we'll get into this. We don't want our groups that big, but at the same time, it just leans into that idea of community. I love your analogy of what Jesus did with his closest followers. And we've seen this all throughout. And even, of course, this webinar is mainly for a denomination, the Pentecostal Church of God. But Pentecostalism is rooted in John Wesley, in Wesleyanism, Wesleyan holiness movement. And Wesley actually had a very robust network of small groups. So this concept is nothing new to the church and to the body of Christ. So I'm hoping that we can help some churches tonight really consider doing this. And we titled the webinar "Launching Small Groups in Your Church," and so
Mhm.
hopefully these leaders are ready to do that, to see how it happens. Now, you've seen this model, and before we actually get into some nuts and bolts, I think it's important to note that there are a lot of different ways to do small groups. And
Mhm.
so what we chose to do on this webinar is, rather than go wide, we just want to go deep with this one model that we are currently using here at Pure Heart. But you have also seen this model work at other churches that you've worked at.
Mhm.
And that was part of the reason that I wanted you on the webinar, is because you have worked at small churches, you've worked at mid-sized churches, and now you've worked at a large church with the same model, the same system. And so tell us a little bit about what you have seen in
Mhm.
explain your experience with these churches and what you saw. And then before we get into specifics, how did you see this dynamic work together?
Yeah, so what was crazy is when I went to this training, this church that I went to at the time was about 30 years old. It was huge, monstrous. It was like 20 to 25,000 people. I think there were 7 or 8 campuses at the time. And they shared that they had 85 to 90% of their people in small groups for the last 30 years. And I thought, what the heck? That's crazy. Because the national average at the time was 30% in small groups. The church that I was in, it was about 7% in small groups. And it just seemed like, if you've been in church any length of time, there's always the latest and greatest method to do this. And I kind of had gotten worn out on that, because every church I was in, we would take on the next thing, the next thing that somebody said, this is going to work and it's going to change everything. And I thought, if they did this for 30 years, there's something to this. So I got to learn from them. I came home and I said, I would love to do this at our church. Our church was 27 years old. Our lead pastor was retiring and 2 of our associate pastors were taking over. So we were in a transition. We were closing an extension campus. There were about 500 people attending on the weekend, which I know is pretty decently big in relation to a lot of churches around the country. But I said, I'll come home and do this, but I want to do it exactly like they told me. I don't have time to make this my own. I was working on some other areas, children and youth. And so I said, let's just do it. And if we need to change something, let's change it. Well, very quickly, all of the results that they told me in training and I read in a book the lead pastor read, which I will tell you is Sticky Church by Larry Osborne. He really talks about this small group system and he shares a lot about what it did in his congregation. But I started seeing it all happen at our church. The first semester, we had 30% of our church in a small group. The second semester, which we'll talk about semesters in a few minutes, we run on 3 semesters a year. But the second semester, we had close to 50. The third semester, about 60%. And then from there, we hit like 70, 75, and then 80 to 85. And that happened in that church. And I'll tell you in a minute some of the non-number things that happened. But then I found myself a few years, about 5 years later, in a very small church, 18 months old. There were 100 people in the church. I joined the church in January of 2020, so you all know where that heads. We were headed right into pandemic and didn't know it. The church had been in existence for 18 months, and the first round of like people who came to help plant were worn out. They were kind of making their way out, and I shared with the pastor. He had talked about not having anyone to do small groups, so I shared with him what I did. So we actually met in February, towards the end of February 2020. Um, Everything shut down in March, we know. And so before even this Zoom stuff was what it is now, I went into him and I said, I think we should try to do this online because I just couldn't figure out how an 18-month-old church was going to survive a pandemic. And so we launched groups online. We were researching all sorts of platforms, Google Hangouts, anything we could think of, and then Zoom opened up the way they did. We launched online on Zoom, 100 people in services before the pandemic, 116 people joined groups. We had 5 families join the church through groups online before they ever set foot in a service at church. And they're still there. All of them are still there today.
So let me
Um,
pause. Let me pause you just for a second. So what I'm hearing you say is that with this small group model, even though the church wasn't in-person gathering, they were
yeah,
still growing
yeah.
through their small group. So they actually had more people when they started regathering than they did
Yeah.
before that. That's amazing.
Yes. Yeah. And then when we got back on campus, of course, more people started coming to campus. So then we kind of went into that rhythm of the growth pattern. Obviously, during the pandemic, people were hungry for connection. So any way you could connect, you were going to do it. But when we got back on campus and we had groups going, the church had grown pretty good to about 250 maybe by the time we like really started having services again. And then we saw that growth pattern again. We hit 50% the second semester, we hit 65 the third, 75 the fourth, and by the fifth semester, we were at about 80% of the church in a small group weekly. So that's two churches. So then you guys called me at Pure Heart. I have friends there. And when you guys were talking about small groups, one of my friends said, hey, let's call Erin. And so I came over here. Very different, again, very different church. I know the church launched like 38 years ago, 18 years on the current campus, and had done a variety of things small group wise, lots of different models and styles and programs and different things. And so I wasn't sure. No, that's not true. I was sure by this time. I came in and I said, no, I think we can probably hit all these goals because it just seems to happen that way. And I think the structure lends itself to that. So we did launch the first semester. We hit 35% the first semester. Our second semester, we were at 50. Our third semester, we were around 55 or so. And then this last semester has been our fourth semester. The church has actually grown by about 150 people, and we still went up in percentage to we landed at 63 this semester. And my hope is that we'll be at 75 as we launch the next semester. So
Yes.
again, it's just kind of like this growth pattern. It's just, it didn't matter which church I was in. It didn't matter how many people were there, what we started with. We just kind of started hitting these marks, which was crazy to me.
Yeah. And when, just to clarify, when you, for our viewers, when you say percentage of the church, you're talking about the adult attendance. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I like to take an average. This is what the church that I learned from taught. Anything I tell you today is what they taught me. I'm just going to clear that up right now. But we take the average weekend adult attendance from the month of October. Because here in Phoenix, I don't know how it is everywhere, but we start school like the second to last week of August. And then we have a big influx of people. And then around Christmas, we take a little bit, or leading into the holidays, we take a little bit of a dip in attendance. So October's a good time because the ones who just come for a minute have kind of leveled off, but we haven't gone into the holiday, everybody traveling kind of stuff. So October every year we'll take the average attendance, and that's what I base our goals on. So yes, it is based on average adult weekly attendance.
Outstanding. All right. So make sure you guys are utilizing the chat and the Q&A as we move forward here. So, Erin, we've given some stories, some success stories of what you've seen in churches, and I will say, having witnessed firsthand, there's an energy that comes in your church when group life is humming, when it's really going well, and a lot of it is flipping the language as well. And you taught me something on this when we first started working together. You talked about us changing the language. Instead of asking the question, hey, are you in a small group? We flip that question. And so what's the question we ask now?
So whose group are you in?
Whose
We
group are
just
you in? Yep.
we want to create a culture that if you belong to this church, if you belong to Pure Heart, or when I was at the other churches, if you belong here, this is what we do. We go to church and we go to small groups. So you must be in one. So I'm going to ask whose.
Yep.
And just kind of setting it helps to drip in that idea that this is what we do as a church, that this is
Yeah.
important to us.
Yeah. We can talk as we go about creating the culture, but we did get our first Q&A came in. It's coming from Rich Hooper. Rich is also one of my coaches. Glad you're on here. And his question is, so the average attendance is just adults and not the total attendance average. Erin, you want to respond to that?
Yeah, it is just adults, and depending on what your church is like, we also have an online presence, and so we don't count that. It's on the physical campus, the number of adults that are attending weekly. And like I said, I take the average of those 4 or 5 weeks in October, depending on the year. And that is what I base all our goals on for the year. So then the next year, hopefully we're growing. And so our our baseline is a little higher, but we're still looking at percentage because we want to know which percentage of people are actually attending
Yeah,
groups.
and we also use a smaller group approach in our student ministries as well. Our student
Mhm.
ministries, even our college, our Heart Young Adults ministry, they use a small group model, teenagers, and even our kids ministry,
Mhm.
even though they don't meet separately, they break off into small groups. And really, this is nothing new. You mentioned it earlier. You and I grew up in an era of Sunday school, and so
Yep.
that's really what our small group experience was like as well. So that's a great
Yeah.
question, Rich. Thanks for asking. All right, Erin, let's start talking about the model. Let's start talking about the how. How do we do this? And so talk to us about the model, and then you can kind of work in as well if a pastor or leader, if they want to get this launched in their church, what are some steps that they need to take?
Yeah. So there were a few big things that I saw different and that I read different, but through the book and when I went to training and just seeing it on the church. One of the big things is that idea that you said is that like we need to grow smaller as we grow larger. And one of the ideas they shared was that we as leaders, we like things large. We want to see a room full of people. No matter how big your room is, you want to see it full of people. But when people come to our churches, they want to be seen and known and heard. And any more than about 25 people in a room, and it's hard for every person to be seen and known and heard. Um, and I have found that true in our small groups when they get a little too big. So that was a big thing for me as I thought, oh, this is so smart. We need to make sure that people find their place and find a community and don't feel lost in the mix of the weekend. The other thing is that they used a message-based model, and I kind of teased our pastor when I came back because I was like, I don't know. They say the magic is in the message, like it's all about you. Um, but I didn't totally understand it till we started it. But so we have a team we meet with every single week during our semesters. It's about 8 people, and all the teams that I've had has been right about that. Has been about 8 people. It's a variety of ages and genders, and a diverse background of where they come from, what they do out in the world. It's not all church staff, but they meet every week with the pastor who's teaching that weekend, and we ask the question, if this is what you're teaching on the weekend, where should we go during the week? So the pastor will give us a 25-minute rundown of the message. And then I open up the floor and just say, okay, what are you thinking? What are your thoughts? What verses are coming up? And so we create a curriculum every week based on the weekend message, not rehashing. And we're really careful not to do that because people don't like that. They feel
Yeah.
like they already did that. We go to a different place in the Bible. I usually like to ask the pastor, what are you hoping we're talking about or wrestling with on the way home? Because I feel like that should be the place we go in the homework. So we
Right.
create that. Yeah, we create that every week during semesters, and we hand that out. We print paper copies. I should have brought one in here. We print paper copies, and it's just one sheet of paper folded in half. It's not huge, but we print them and we hand them out to every single person that comes on the campus. And we do that because, again, we want to create that culture. This is what we do, so you must need this. And it's great because some people are hesitant to get in the groups, but they'll start doing the homework on their own. And eventually they will come to a group and say, hey, I've been doing this and now I really want to talk about it with people.
Yeah. Let me
Um,
let me let me
Go
just
ahead.
push on
Yeah.
two quick things while we're on this point about creating the curriculum. I've been on both ends of this experience, both as a preaching pastor and then also as part of the curriculum writing. One of the things that's beautiful about it is other than you and I, and maybe on occasion we'll have another staff person in there, but I love what you said about that. These are all volunteers.
Yeah.
So, even if a church doesn't have, maybe you got a solo pastor church that there's no other paid staff, you can still recruit a small team of volunteers to create something like what we're talking about. And then as a preaching pastor, being on the other end of it, it really forces me to get into a rhythm. And we don't always have the message fully completed by Tuesday, but we know where we're going with that. And you don't have to be really married to Tuesday either. You you could probably do it on whatever day worked for your volunteer team. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. The one thing that you have to think about is I do like to get the homework written and send it back to the teaching pastor for him just to have eyes on it. Want to make sure that he's comfortable with what we've put together and also that we're not accidentally heretical. I feel like there needs to be some backup there. And then time to print and fold it. So that would be the only thing that I say, whoever is going to be writing, you just need to give them a little time to get those things done.
Okay.
Because it's kind of a fast turnaround because you're doing
Yep.
it every week. I mean, it
Every
doesn't have to
week.
be Tuesday for sure.
Right.
And it is fun because it isn't, I think it's actually better when it's not all church staff and not all pastors, because pastors think one, a certain way, not one way, I didn't mean to say that, but a certain way. But the people listening are listening just like they would be in their chairs. And you can speak to this a little bit, John, but I think it's kind of cool for the pastor to be able to get a little bit of insight to what people think of when he's teaching this before he's up on the stage on Sunday. Like when we're in the meeting and people start telling you what they're thinking.
Oh yeah.
I
I mean,
think it's
it's
kind of
that's
neat that you get some
yeah.
response before it has to be talked about.
Yeah, that's very helpful. I know that from my perspective, because we all know this, every preacher that's on this call, on this webinar, they understand this. Sometimes you'll say something in a message and then somebody will come up to you and say, "Hey, I loved when you said this," and you're thinking, "I didn't say
Mm-hmm.
that." But
Yeah.
that's how the Holy Spirit is working in their life to bring God's word to them. People hear things in different ways. They apply it to their own unique situation. And I mean, just I'm just thinking we have on our team right now, our writing team, we have a college professor, a house cleaner, and a college student
Mm-hmm.
that's part of this writing team. So it's very diverse, and you get different perspectives that happen. So yeah, it does help me as a preacher to prepare for that weekend and get an idea of, okay, this is where this might land. And then there's even maybe a story or an illustration that I thought about using. And then when we talk it through, it just doesn't seem to fit as well. So it helps me bring my final thoughts together. So yeah, it's a great question. Okay, so you got the writing, the production. We hand that out every week. So continue with let's
Yeah.
keep walking through this model.
So the other thing that they really helped us understand in this training is that the average churchgoer is only going to give 2 hours a week. And so we really have to decide what we want those 2 hours to be. And so they really pushed a lot on make sure that you're not competing for the people's time during the semester. Of course, there's some different groups of people. Stay-at-home moms and senior adults will do more than 2 hours a week, but most families in America right now are they're only going to have about 2 hours a week to give. So if we ask them to be in church 1 hour a week, what is the other hour we want them to be in? And they said for them it's small groups. And so it's structured in a way that there are some natural rhythms and times, which I'll talk about in just a minute. So that there are some times to do some other things, but you have to kind of think through your big church schedule. Like, are we asking them to come to a worship night? Are we asking them to come to a conference? Are we asking them to come to a women's event and a men's event and a this event and a that event all during the semester? Well, then they're probably not going to be in group, because I would say the enemy would love to get them out of group and keep them out of group. Being personal and being in this place where they're with other believers really studying God's word is going to be the last place the enemy wants them. So we have to be really careful. And then the other thing is that every single week the pastor points to the heart crew homework, or the small group homework. We call them heart crews. The small group homework, and then every week the homework points back to the pastor. So somewhere during the message, the pastor will say something like, "This week in your heart crews, or your small groups, you're going to talk more about this." And the homework will always say, "This weekend in the message, the pastor said." I find that the people want to do what's important to the pastor. And so if he's pointing at the guide and we're pointing back at him, it's creating this great dynamic between us. So those are some of
Excellent.
the big four. Those are like the big four that I think really make a difference in the why we do the things the way we do it. There's of course a lot of how, but those are kind of the big things.
There's a couple of questions that came in related to curriculum before we move on to the next area, because I'm sure that the leaders are really anxious to hear, how do we get
Yeah,
people into groups? That's a big one.
yeah, yeah.
So Rich is on again. he said, what are your thoughts about using AI to develop the curriculum from the weekend messages? I'd like to respond to this one first, and then you can. First of all, I want to make it clear. We want to make it clear that it's not. We're working toward the weekend message. So I hope that, Rich, we made that clear to you guys that when we hand out the small group curriculum for that week, it is based on that week's message. It's not the previous week. So, and I think that's where you were going with that. But using I mean, that's really a personal conviction that every leader would have to deal with. I mean, maybe it's a small church and resources are limited. And if you feel comfortable in doing that, I don't think it's really a black and white issue. But it's very, I do think it's super important to try to get the input of the actual people that you're going to be ministering to on that weekend. What do you think on that one, Erin?
Yeah, I'm not opposed necessarily. I just think that since I write, there is an element of this where I kind of sit and like, God, okay, where are we supposed to go? And so I think using the AI in addition to that, like being mindful of what the Spirit's saying and where he's leading, I think is good. But I think AI certainly could create questions if you were feeding in the prompt, this is where this is the story, and this is what we want to pull out of the story. I know the AI stuff can be really specific. Like you can add all kinds of things to make it more personal, or even just come in on the other side of it. The other thing I would say is no matter the size of the church, I would just kind of figure out if you have a writer in there. And this doesn't have to be one of the pastors or a staff person. The second church I did this at, I wasn't on staff. I just volunteered. And I am a high school English teacher and I love to write and read. So that's a natural for me. But there's some other people in the church probably that are happy to write and excited to use that gift that they don't get to use very often.
Right.
Yeah.
And the next curriculum question before we move on to some more of the how, Pastor Joe Turner from Ohio, good to have you on the webinar, my friend. Could you send us an example of the curriculum? And I believe our plan was, because we got your email address when you registered, and Erin and I talked about this as we were prepping, and we would love to load you guys up with resources as much as possible. So the short answer is yes, Joe, we can definitely do that for you, brother.
Yeah, I did have my husband bring me one in, but I want to show you it is really simple, and
Oh,
we keep it
good.
really simple on purpose, which we will send this. I'll send this and a leader guide. So there's just some questions. It's just one page folded in half, printed on the whole thing. And we get those done the Tuesday before, printed on Thursday, so they're ready to hand out on Sunday. But yeah, we have a few resources we definitely want to send.
And we also make these available on our app as well. But there's something about doing both, of physically putting it in their hands. I mean, it sounds old school, and I don't really know why it connects that way, but it definitely works of getting it into the hands of people. So, all right, let's move on from curriculum. Let's start talking about how do we get people into groups? What's our strategy and our approach to doing that?
Yeah. So one of the first things is that I've mentioned a couple times, we do groups in 3 semesters. And we structure those semesters so that they follow the flow of the school year. I know there's a lot of people outside of the school year, but families with kids function with the school year. So we start about a week or about 10 days after school starts here in Phoenix. We launch groups so that families have a good chance to get back in the rhythm of school. So kids will start school like August 5th or something crazy like that. And then we launch groups about August 20th, somewhere in there. And then our first semester, our fall semester will go all the way until the week before Thanksgiving. We take from Thanksgiving to New Year's off because that's a time when everybody gets busy. There's work parties, family parties, all kinds of traveling, different things that go on, kids, concerts, and all that. So of course, it's a normal time people get busy. So we break because there's nothing worse than going to a small group and 2 people show up and half the group's gone. And then we come back in January for a winter semester. That's what we're just finishing up this next week at Pure Heart. We come back about 2 weeks after the first of the year, and we have about an 8-week semester. And then we take 2 weeks off around spring break in the area. And again, that's a time when kids are out of school, everything kind of gets off kilter. So we take 2 weeks off. And then we come back to, this time we're going to come back around the end of March, and we'll do another 8-week semester, and we take the entire summer off, which I know sounds crazy, but a couple of things really work well with this. Number one, this gives your leaders good breaks. It keeps your leaders very healthy. And I would much rather have a leader lead for a long time than just for 1 year and be gone. And it creates anticipation. Every semester, people are anticipating when groups start again because there's been a little break, because there's a fresh place to start again. People can sign up and we have 2 weeks of signups before the semester starts. So we're getting ready to start signups on March 9th and 10th, and then 15th and 16th for our semester that's starting at the end of March. And this is one of the resources I'll send you. I'll send you our calendar so that you can kind of see the breakdown and then make it work with your school schedules and stuff in your area. But we'll have 2 weeks of signups. People can sign up for a group. On those sign up weekends, they can come. I just ask the leaders just to come out and be at tables with us, not to promote their group, but just to help people find the group that's best for them. And this is one of the other things that I think makes it work really well. People can sign up for a group. Groups are open. So we have 2 weeks of signups. Then groups are open for the first 3 weeks where people can try another group if this is not a good fit for them. And I train my leaders, listen, you don't fit with every person. So every person's not going to fit with you. We want everyone to find the people that they fit with. And so it's an easy in. There's one way in and it's easy, but there's a lot of ways out. So if I go to a group and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is not for me, I can just tell my leader or call me, the small group director or coach, and say, I would really like to try another group. We tell them what groups are open and let them try another group. We do closed groups at 3 weeks, and we do this on purpose to create a safe space for sharing, because people are not as likely to share and really get personal if people are coming in and out all the time.
So true.
Yeah. So that creates a nice dynamic. At the end of each semester, we ask everyone in the group, do you want to stay in the group? Do you want to take a break from groups, or do you want to try a different group? So again, they're not stuck for their whole life. We wind up meeting about 26 weeks a year. So just about half the year we're in groups, but it feels like a full year, and relationships are made, and we see spiritual growth, and we see rested, well-equipped leaders because they have not just had to trudge through every single week.
Yeah, and we do have some groups that even meet off semester, don't we?
Yeah, I don't tell groups they can't meet. We don't create a full curriculum. So we'll create just like a half sheet, like food for thought every week on the message. And some groups want to meet every week. I don't tell them they can't, but I also don't tell them they have to.
Right.
So some groups will be like, we're going to meet. A lot of times the new groups will do this. They'll meet during the breaks, and then the very next year they're like, yeah, we're taking a break this time. Like, yeah, a break's good.
Yeah, and on the signups, I remember when we first started this, I mean, we did as large as our church is, we did the first semester where it was old school. It was paper. Yeah, clipboards and paper signups, and of course now we've worked with our IT department to do that online and streamline that process a little bit. But man, we started old school. There's nothing wrong with that. And
well,
go
sorry,
ahead.
a lot of people want to come out and ask questions, and they want to meet leaders, and they're just looking at it online is not as comfortable as coming and asking somebody questions about things. So
yeah, that's good. So I got a couple of questions that have come in, Erin. This is from Daniel Barnes, and I think this segues into the next question. And then Pastor Bob Allen's got a couple of great questions too on here. So the question is, how do you choose your leaders, and what vetting process do you have in place? I think that's where we were going next anyway. So let's talk about that. And then Pastor Bob, we will come back to your two questions because they fit into space, which we will talk about, and then childcare as well. So we'll get to those two, but let's go ahead and answer the question about leaders and finding them and the vetting process.
Yeah, so this was another thing I learned that I thought was really, really key to this process. We definitely guard the gate when it comes to small group leaders. If we're looking at getting people in these groups for half the year, we're essentially asking these leaders to pastor their group, right? We're asking them to be there if there's medical needs, if there's job loss, if there's, we're asking them to care for their people, and they're spiritually leading them. So we need to be really careful. So how I like to start when you're first starting, if you are the staff person, you've got, or if you're the pastor, you've got a little different ability in this. But I asked the staff at all three churches, is there anybody you would recommend that would make a great leader? And what I'm looking for is I am looking for people who lead in their life outside of church and love Jesus and live a life following him. But I definitely want leaders. I want people who are managers. I want people who are military. I want teachers. I want just people who lead in their life because they know how to lead people. I don't need to teach them that. They are good dealing with people. What I need to teach them is how to use the resources we give them, how the structure works, how they manage their group according to what we're asking of them. But I don't really have to spend a lot of time teaching them how to talk to people and how to resolve conflict and how to do that stuff. So I always ask first of the staff, and every semester I ask, is there anyone you would recommend to be a leader? And especially when you're getting started. If someone comes to me, I send a message out to every single person on staff. And at the small church, it was a small amount of people. At this bigger church, it's a big amount. But I say, hey, does anyone know this person? They're asking to lead a small group. If you have any concerns, would you message me so that I can get feedback from the staff? And if nobody knows them, which I haven't had yet, almost everybody who has come forward, someone on staff has known them and is able to give me information. But either way, I will meet with the people. I sit down with them. I talk to them. I get to know them a little bit and try to figure out why they want to lead the group. What experience do they have? And I am able to kind of vet them that direction, almost like a job interview, but not quite as intense, I guess. But I rely a lot on the staff. Once groups have going, the next phase of recruiting leaders is asking current small group leaders if there's anyone in their group they think would make a good leader. And I ask them, if someone in your group, you start thinking like, man, they would make great small group leaders, ask them to lead the group a couple times during the semester. Tell them you need to take a break from leading that week and see if they'll lead, so you can see how they work with the people, how they use the curriculum. Do they have an agenda? Do they want to go off on some tangent all the time, or are they really just here to lead? Because a lot of times the leaders come from within. And so that is now how we're growing groups, because in each group there are leaders. Like when I started my group here at Pure Heart, very quickly I saw 3 couples and I was like, oh man, I think all 3 of these people could lead. And one is currently leading my group, and now we have another one that's going to start leading another group. But I gave them a couple semesters. I asked that leaders be in a group for a semester, so that we can make sure they function well, they show up, they're on time, that there's nothing in, we need to figure out about them. So leaders help. I'm going to answer one more thing with that. I don't make it hard for people to lead. If these people are leaders, I don't need to ask them to come for 8 weeks of training, for extensive classes, because they really don't have the time for that. They lead people. If we've determined that they are following Jesus and they want to help other people follow Jesus well, we just need to get them in there with people. And so I do a lot of leading and training through my weekly leader emails, which sounds silly, but I'm very intentional with them. I'm very intentional with the information that I'm dripping in constantly. I guide them every single week on what needs to be happening for the next week. And then I make at least 5 phone calls or in-person touches with leaders every week, and just say, hey, how's your group going? Tell me what's happening. Or is everybody coming? And it's really a pretty cool system, because if they are not leading well, people will leave their group. And if I notice that a whole bunch of people are leading a group, then I move in and say, okay, what's going on? What's the situation here? Because people aren't stuck.
Yeah, that's great, Erin. Now, these questions are so good that are being asked here, and Pastor Bob, I can tell you're a senior pastor just by your questions. I love this. So I'm going to start with this one because it kind of takes us a little bit back to curriculum. Do you approve curriculum that is covered between semesters by those who continue to meet year round? I think you answered that a little bit with because you provide just a synopsis sheet.
Yeah.
Right.
But I think too, he means like if they do book studies and stuff.
Yeah,
so
right,
if somebody's asking us, I look at
Yep.
it and then I ask John, what do you think?
Yep.
Do you have any problem with this? We do definitely want to approve curriculum. We've had a couple groups
Yeah.
where they'll tell me later, like, we did this, and I'm like, no, why don't you tell me next time what you're gonna do?
Yeah. Tell us
Um,
up front. And I think
yeah.
that's a great practice. And yes, we had one group that wanted to do a study on Revelation. And of course, we had to vet that one out and make sure that was good. But by and large, we haven't had too much of a problem with it. So,
The
but
other
that's
thing
it.
is, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to
No,
cut
go
you off.
ahead. You're good.
The other thing is we don't buy curriculum anymore. So we're not
Right.
buying the books, we're not buying videos. So if a group wants to do it, they're going to have to fork out the cash. So that is a little bit of a deterrent sometimes. And not that the book studies are bad, but they have to really decide and they have to really do their
Yeah.
homework before they bring stuff in. So yeah,
Yeah.
we do ask them to share with us so that, and I tell them, we want to make sure that this aligns with our values and with our doctrine and our theology and all the things. We want to make sure that it's in alignment with who we are. So
Absolutely. Let's start getting into it. We've got about 15 to 20 minutes left to honor everybody's time. And so these are really logistical questions, and they're kind of interrelated, and we can answer both of these, I think, in this next segment here. The question was asked, are groups meeting in homes or at the church? So we'll talk about that. But then the question of childcare.
mhm.
So let's talk about both of those things.
Okay, so at all three churches, I say whether they meet in the church is dependent on the church. So if you have room for people to meet, obviously it's just going to be a few groups because it seems like we're limited on rooms these days in churches. But we have groups currently that meet both in homes and in churches. I encourage people to try to work it out in homes. And we always try to, the goal is to have two couples or two entities, two single people partner together to lead a group. So you have a host couple and a lead couple. Obviously, if it's a group of single adults, that looks a little different, or like a men's group or a women's group. But the idea here is that one couple would host in their home. So they would do the work of getting their house cleaned up, be ready, provide drinks, that kind of thing. And the couple who's leading just comes in to actually lead the discussion. So it's a shared responsibility. Um, a lot of people come in and they don't have someone to be their host. So I ask them to quickly start identifying someone in their group who might be that person. So it's not all on one set of people. But we do we do let groups use rooms at the church. And we've done that at all three churches. It's just been a different number of groups. Right now, we only allowed them to come on 2 nights. And one of those nights is Wednesdays, and that's because we offer childcare. We do charge the families a small fee to help pay for it, but we offer childcare on the campus for any groups that meet on campus on Wednesday nights. So I've tried to get all of our young family groups on Wednesday nights so that they can have childcare there. As far as the homes go and childcare, I tell the leader they get to make this decision. If they have a nice big house with another room and they want to let kids play in there while they have group, that's up to them. If they want to say no childcare, that's up to them. I think that the way a leader leads the longest if it's the best for them. So I tell them to choose their day and time and location and their wants for childcare.
The childcare discussion is one that every church is going to have when they move to this model. And I mean, it would probably be our heart to just be able to provide it for everybody, but I don't think there's a church out there that has the resources to do that and make it sustainable. So what I love about that model is we are able to provide it. We do ask for contributions from people to help us do that. And then also putting the burden back onto each group to decide what is going to be best. And so I think those are some great options. Pastor Barnes is asking the question of specific qualifications within, a denomination or a church. Do people, obviously we want them to be saved. So, and Erin, you'll take this in the context of this, but in our denomination, we believe in baptism in the Holy Spirit, and so the question is, do we require that? Now, here at Pure Heart, we don't ask that question. But, you would have to ask that question within the context of your local church. And I can tell you this, nothing comes down from the top of the organization that tells you what you have to do at the local church level as far as your leaders are concerned. I mean, that's up to you and your church to decide. So it's a great question, but I think that's something that you as a pastor would have to decide for your own church. Okay. So, all right, we've talked about the why. We've talked about the how we do things. We've talked about some logistical things of getting people into groups and vetting leaders and utilizing space, childcare. We've covered quite a bit of ground in the last 50 minutes here. So, Erin, is there anything else that you want to add to this discussion? And then those of you that are going to be asking final questions, we've got about 10 minutes left. So I'd love for you to just go ahead and start typing your questions in now so we can leave that open at the end where we can do that. But is there anything else that you want to add about the model, the structure, leadership, any of those type of things?
Yeah, I just want to say a couple quick things, and it's more just kind of like what happens in your church when you do this. Number one, I do want to touch on the child care one more time, is that when I was at the church learning, they said, we consider this the best children's and youth ministry. And I was a youth pastor and I was like, meh, that's ridiculous. Now you lost me. But they said there's nothing we can give a kid that's better than two parents growing in their relationship with God. And I thought, okay, you're right. And so they even say if a family cannot afford childcare, to take it out of their tithe. And they said, we know that's controversial a little bit, but we want them to understand that this is so important to us that we want you in a group. We don't want to put any obstacles in there. And so because they ask for a small payment from the child care also. So I just think like really thinking through, like if people are growing spiritually, they are going to start giving more. They're going to start giving more of their time. They're going to do those things. And it's important. It's important for them. It's important for their kids. Some of the things that I saw that were not number related, I saw when we first started the message based groups that there was a huge anticipation for the weekend message. You can almost feel it. And that's what you were talking about at the beginning. You don't really know what you're feeling, but there's people are coming in ready to take notes. They want to study. They want to be ready. So when they get to their group, they can talk about it. There is kind of an underlying unity among the people in the church, because even though we're not in the same group, John and I are not in the same group, but we're studying the same thing, and we know we're studying the same thing. Every single semester at all churches, at all three churches for the last 7 years, I've always had my message planning meeting before I go to my group for the previous weekend's message. So we have the message, I have message planning on Tuesday, I go to group on Wednesday. So I'm planning the homework for the following Sunday. Every single semester by about week 3, the people in my group will start talking about whatever the pastor is going to be preaching about the next week. And I know it because I'm in the meeting.
Yeah.
And it just thrills me. It gives me goosebumps even now, because I feel like we are following where God's leading. God's leading our pastors to lead us. And when we're in the message and we're in small group, we're like on this train. It's like 2 train tracks, and we're heading in the direction we're supposed to go. I see that one of the big things we've seen at all the churches is that this does work to close the back door of the church. A lot of times we do a lot of things to open the front door to invite a lot of people in, but then people are heading out the back. And that's what Larry's Good Sticky Church was about. And that's why he set up the small group system this way. But we see people, they now have accountability. They have friends. They want to be there. And so they attend more services. They watch or listen to the services online when they're gone, because they don't want to miss it because they're going to group. They're connected. And so those are some of the non-number things that I think are beautiful. I've seen people come in, not know Jesus. They get right in the group, and the group begins to teach them how to read their Bible, what baptism means, what does salvation mean. In my own group, one of my really good friends came in, didn't know Jesus, met him. 2 semesters later was baptized, now follows Jesus with his family. I mean, it's just crazy because the group begins to create this safe space for people to experience that growth, ask their questions, even if they feel dumb, because these are people who care about them.
Yeah, that's beautiful, Erin. The question came in it's related to childcare. And would a host who is allowing children need to have the same background check as your church children's workers, since it's a ministry of the church?
We have not done that because the parents are there. The parents are there at the place. So
yeah. I think legally now, if it's on campus, for the nights that we have it on campus, we have fully vetted background checked workers because it's on campus. I don't think it's required if it's an off-campus activity. Um, but that might be something you'd want to check with your state requirements on that and see what they have to say about it. But I don't think if it's off campus and in a home that it would have to be subject to the same. But I think you would want it though. Uh, that's just my opinion. That you can take that or leave it. Okay, and then Pastor Joe again. Once groups are closed, would new people who come to the church during that time have to wait for the next semester to start? Great question.
Really good question. So one of the things we never do is we never tell people no, they cannot get in a group. So what we do is we offer the last 3 weeks of groups. We offer what's called intro to message-based groups. And so any new person that inquires about groups is directed right there. So I lead that. I'm actually training another leader to help lead that. But we have that for 3 weeks. They come, they hear how groups function. We go through the curriculum just like a group. And then they have the first option of open groups for the upcoming semester. So there's only a few weeks in the middle where they can't get in a group. But we don't say no, you can't get in. So we're open the first 3 weeks. Our longest semester is 12. We have 3 weeks at the end. So there's 6 weeks in the middle where we're pushing people to this intro group. I will also ask leaders if they're willing to take people, or if their group is still willing to take people in the middle. I will let them add. A group leader can always add someone to their group. I'm just saying I won't drop people in without their permission.
Yeah, very good. Great questions, guys. You're loving this responses from all of you, the participants, and what a blessing to have your interaction with us. I would like to say one thing just from a pastoral perspective. In creating this culture within your church, it's really important that you ask your leaders to do this as well.
Mm-hmm.
Even you yourself, I hold to that even as a senior leader, you should be in a small group. Now, what that looks like in your experience, I mean, you may have to do it just a little bit differently. You may have to handpick who's in your group, and that's okay. But it's important for you to lead the charge on this. If it's a passion of yours and your congregation sees you doing it and your leaders see you doing it as a senior leader, then things are going to trickle out. And so we need to lead the charge on this and ask those that are in leadership to be part of a small group as well. And you may get some pushback on it, but it's important to discipleship, to spiritual life, and the community life of your church. You've heard some stories, incredible stories tonight about how things have grown. And, Erin's now done this and helped 3 churches launch this same model with the same exact results, regardless of what the size of the congregation is. So it's a beautiful thing, and really hope that you all will prayerfully consider doing this in your church. I think we got time for just a couple more questions here. So this is a good question. What is the advised max size of a group?
So I say 12 to 16 people. That depends on where the group's held. Like if the host says I can only fit 12 people, but that creates enough people where if 2 couples were gone, you still have a good group to do discussion. So if it's 12 and 4 people are gone, you still have 8 people gathered. So it's not that awkward. There's 3 of us here, and now we got to talk through all this personal stuff. If it gets much bigger than 16, which I won't lie, my group right now is big. It's like 22 people. But we've been together a little while. But what happens is the introverts never share because they don't have to. And I just feel bad. They never get a chance. So I say 12 to 16 people is a good number.
Next question. And I'll just answer this one. Do you do this instead of a midweek service? Yes. We want people in groups, and these groups meet throughout the week. And like Erin said earlier, Wednesday and Thursday night, Tuesday and Wednesday night, we open our campus to use the space that's here. Wednesday night is the night that we provide childcare, but we have groups that meet all throughout the week. Do we have them going 7 days a week now? Do you know?
We don't have any on Saturday, but we have Sunday through Friday.
Yeah. It's a great question. All right. And then this one is an interesting question. Do you encourage members to rotate through different groups to get members to know each other to avoid the possibility of cliques?
I actually don't. I actually think that people do really well when they find a group of people um, that they connect with. I had a group that was together for 5 years. And because everybody is doing this and everybody understands the vision that we want to keep making room for more people, I have not experienced, I know it's crazy, but I haven't experienced cliques happening in this realm. There is, like I said, that underlying unity that we're all doing this. And so people ask, oh, whose group are you in? How's it going? What's happening? And it doesn't seem to get that way. But what does happen is there are some really good relationships where people are doing life together, doing kids' activities, doing different things together, just like we would have them do. So I haven't seen that to be a problem, even in the smaller church that I did it in.
Yeah. Yeah, I haven't either. And you touched on this earlier, but there's a dynamic that ends up happening when your group is together and those relationships form and they're solidified. They really start doing a lot of the pastoral care, what we would call pastoral care in the church. Several weeks ago, I had somebody come up to me on a weekend and say, "Hey, Pastor, we had a death in our small group." And I said, "Oh no," I
Mm-hmm.
said, how can we help?" And they said, "Oh, we got everything. We set up a meal train.
Mm-hmm.
We made sure that they got in touch with the church to make sure that they had a pastor to do their celebration of life service, and we made sure that they were taken care of through this time." And I mean, what a blessing
Mm-hmm.
because you're actually empowering people to do the work of the ministry. I mean, this is Ephesians 4 stuff, right? Equipping the
It's,
saints for the work of the ministry. So
yeah.
it can be an absolutely beautiful thing. Yeah.
One thing I would add is that I don't ask pastors to lead groups, and I know at the beginning a lot of times they have to, but I actually recommend that pastors don't lead. That maybe they host a group, but let someone else lead, just so they don't have to
But they're
lead.
still part of a group though.
Still part of a group,
Yeah.
but
Right.
they get to just be there, and then also people don't try to only get in the pastor's group.
Yes. Yeah, that can be a problem, especially in any size church, but I think in smaller
Yeah,
churches that would really come into play. So excellent, everybody. Well, Erin, thank you for taking the time to do this evening. I know that the pastors and the church leaders that are on this webinar are so appreciative. So, Erin, would you like to pray for the leaders that are on the chat or on the
I
webinar and
would.
close us out tonight? Okay.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Heavenly Father God, we just thank you so much for this night. I thank you for this opportunity to share about groups, Lord. I thank you for these pastors and staff, Lord, who are seeking ways to serve their people more and more, Lord. Our heart is for spiritual growth. Our heart is that the kingdom grows. Our heart is that people really learn to surrender their lives to you and follow you, God. For these pastors and staff, Lord, I ask that if you are moving them in a new direction with small groups or even just small groups in general for the first time, I ask that you would give them wisdom, give them discernment, Lord. God, let us be a resource. Let us be a help, however we can be. God, I ask that you would bless them mightily, Lord. I know pastoring is hard and it is sometimes lonely. So I just ask that you would fill their hearts. God, help them to feel your presence, to hear your call well and clear. God, give them rest, give them peace, give them energy for all the things that you're asking them to do, Lord. Lord, we love you so much. In your son's name, amen.
Amen. Hey, thank you, Pastor Dusty, for that comment about it being a great session. And so hopefully this has been helpful for everybody. And we look forward to our next webinar. So be watching your social media feeds for the PCG. And through those of you that are involved in the coaching network, we will keep you informed on our future webinars for 2024. With that said, God bless you guys. Have a wonderful, wonderful evening. Take care.